In today's episode, a teenage boy and his friend's banana boat capsizes in an unexpected storm. Little do the boys know that the water they now swim in is a well-known crocodile breeding spot swarming with crocs. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying crocodile attack on Bidem Warusam. Welcome to Final Affliction. The young subject of our video today's name was Edward Morrison Warusam, but his friends and family called him by his nickname, Bidem. There was a lot to Bidem that defined him, that's for sure. At only 16 years old, Bidem already showed that he was going to grow up to be a very promising young man. He grew up on the island of Saibai, just 4 kilometers south of Papua New Guinea. He lived in a small rural village where kids get to be kids. They run and play in the wilderness and spend their days riding on the island's fiberglass canoes called banana boats. Bidem was a natural athlete. A big boy from an early age, he towered over most of his classmates. His handsome features certainly caught the eye of more than one teenage girl. But unlike most tall and muscular boys that tended to be strong but slow, Bidem was unusually quick on his feet, perfect for soccer. But instead of settling for just one sport, he played both soccer and rugby, and he sure played them well. You'd think that a handsome boy with such natural athletic abilities would have let the gifts of genetics go to his head. But no, Bidem was sweet and kind. He got along with absolutely everyone. If he wasn't teaching the youngsters how to fish, he was helping one of the elderly members of the community to carry their loads to the market for them. He took special delight in teaching his 8 brothers and sisters how to handle a ball on the field, and there was no bully or boy who would dare take advantage of the Warusam sisters, not with Bidem there to protect them. He was the kind of son any parent would be proud of. In June of 2024, Bidem and another boy, only identified as his 13-year-old friend, were out in a banana boat. There was never any reason given as to why the teenagers were out there that night, and we can only assume that they were on their way back from Papua New Guinea, using the boat to sail back to his island. Sailing over to the other island for shopping isn't all that uncommon. Whatever the reason, the boys were late coming in, and it was already dark out. Using the lights from the village, they navigated their way through the rain. To say that the conditions weren't ideal is an understatement. The storm that was rolling in hadn't quite reached its peak, but the constant rain was causing water to pool at the bottom of their raft, and the waves were slowly picking up in size. To make matters worse, the boat's engine wasn't exactly in tip-top shape. It had been sputtering and coughing plumes of smoke for days, and the extra effort to get through the rough waters was just too much for the motor to handle. Just 500 meters off the shore, the engine suddenly gave out. The boys actually laughed at their bad luck at first. Luckily, both were very strong swimmers, and the shoreline was already in sight. It wasn't like this was a full-blown storm yet, and they'd swum through worse before. But without warning, the boat was rocked by a large wave, capsizing it in one swift motion. The boys went flying into the surf head first. When they came up, their laughter had disappeared from their lips. They would have to leave the vessel behind. There was no way that they would be able to swim to shore, dragging an upside-down boat with them. It was going to sink in seconds anyway. Their closest point to dry land was right beside a well-known crocodile breeding spot. Had it been daylight, the boys would have recognized it immediately. Even foolhardy kids weren't willing to risk swimming in that specific area of the island. The place was teeming with crocs big and small, and the females were especially aggressive if they perceived a danger to their young. But this just happened to be the fastest and straightest path to get out of their predicament. The younger boy put his head down and struck out in a freestyle. Bidem, however, settled for a breaststroke and allowed him to keep his head above water so that he could keep an eye on his friend, who was swimming just feet ahead of him. Otherwise, he'd have been way ahead of the younger boy. But Bidem promised him that he'd keep an eye out in case the lad couldn't handle the waves. Bidem was keeping guard ahead, squinting in the rain, never taking his eyes off the dark head of his friend who was barely visible in the rain downpour. An 11-foot crocodile was a little farther out from shore than it would usually go because the storm had disoriented it. But even in the darkness, it sensed the boys as soon as they were thrown off the boat. And with them heading straight toward it already, there was no way that it was going to let such a good opportunity slip by. It focused on Bidem simply because he was slower. To the crocodile, it looked like a weaker animal, lagging behind the pack. But not even a young man as fit and strong as Bidem could have stood a chance against the predator racing towards him under the dark water. It was smooth and quick. It simply sailed out of the water, slammed its heavy body down on Bidem's back, and as they were driven down into the deep, it lashed its tail around and wrapped itself securely around the boy. Bidem barely had time to register that there was 600 pounds worth of reptile on his back before the crushing squeeze from the animal's body completely enveloped him. The two went spinning down, deeper and deeper. The beast's death roll was in full effect until they finally reached the sandy bottom of the ocean, and there they lay, Bidem's struggles becoming ever weaker by the second. The other boy never even knew what was transpiring behind him. He kept swimming until he reached the beach, and by then, Bidem was long dead, and the croc was swimming with its lucky meal to the very inlet where the boy was standing. Confused that there was no one behind him, the boy wondered if this was a silly prank to scare him. But Bidem was not a prankster, and this situation was already far from being funny. The lad waited only 5 minutes before he ran for help. There was no way he'd be underwater for that long. He'd have had to come up for air. This was serious. Barefoot, he ran through the brush and the rain and reached the village in minutes. He banged on the door of the first house he could reach. The residents knew him by sight, and they knew Bidem too. The call to the authorities was placed immediately, and before the hour was out, the whole village, police, and Bidem's siblings and parents were all out there in the deluge, searching every inch of the shoreline and riding out into the storm with floodlights, but they found nothing. It was no use in the dark and the rain. The next morning, the storm still hadn't let up, but at least it was light. It didn't take long for them to locate Bidem's body. He was found tucked into a nook of the inlet where the boys were heading toward. The bite marks on his shoulder and his partially eaten leg was enough to confirm that he hadn't drowned as everyone had thought, but the evidence was undeniable. Bidem had drowned, but not because of the rough waters. He'd been drowned intentionally, and then the culprit had begun to eat him too. Now they needed to find the beast. The island as a whole agreed that the animal needed to be euthanized. Everyone was devastated. Every home, every business, and every soul on Saibai went into a deep stupor. Sadness almost can't describe the cloud of grief that descended on the people. They'd lost one of their own. A boy who they celebrated when he was born, who took his first steps in front of the auntie next door. The lad who carried a girl home when she scraped her knee, and the teenager who was going to become some lucky girl's husband one day. A day after his body was found, one of the searchers, still out looking for crocs that fit the size that was estimated from the bite marks, noticed a crocodile that not only fit the description, but that was also displaying some unusual defensive behavior. Just feet from where Bidem's body was found, it was pacing up and down the shoreline. It was murderously angry that the body was gone and was seeking out the thief. With its head up high, the aggressive crocodile stormed into the water towards the rescue boat, where it was shot. And sure enough, when a necropsy was performed, Bidem's remains were found in its digestive tract. A bit of rotten luck and a bad storm was all it took to rob a promising young man of his bright future and bringing him to his terrifying final affliction.